Okay, we'll just wait another minute for people to join. Okay, I will wait one more minute. Okay. Let's get started here. I'm just going to pull this up. Okay, if you can just write me a quick message and let me know that you can hear me. If you can hear me. Just a quick yes. Okay. I will assume that a couple people saying yes means everyone can hear me. All right, guys, we have just a little bit to do today, not a whole lot, because you guys also have a quiz to write for me, so don't forget about that. Just one second, I want to start this going. There we are. Okay, so I sent an email to everybody on Saturday morning in regards to your calendar. And this is just a way to help you guys get a little bit organized. So I just want to show you a bit about how that calendar works. So I'm just going to share my calendar screen with you. There we are. Okay, just going to get out of that. All right, so this is what the calendar screen looks like. Oh. So that link that I sent you for your calendar, you actually have to open that link on a desktop. So you can't do it through your phone. But once you open it through your desktop and you say yes, you accept it, it'll take you to your Google Calendar on your desktop. Excuse me. And you say yes to it. And then what happens, so if you just take a look at the bottom left corner of my screen, and what we see is all of these little calendars. So these are all my calendars that I have. So the calendar for you is the medical that I shared with you is the medical services 3 for block 3. So this is what your calendar would look like if you open it up. So let's look at today. And that being said, before I look at what we have today, if you take a look at this, so I've now clicked on your calendar. Now that you've accepted that calendar, when you go onto your phone, you'll see that same list of my calendars, and you can turn on that meds 3, 10, meds 10, and then 3 for block 3 on yours, and then that'll always show up on your calendar. So automatically, anything that I put into Google Classroom, all the tasks will be on here. And then when you have quizzes and stuff, I'll also put them on here. Okay, so then what can you do with this? If you click on something, so for example, if I click on this heart quiz, I put a link here to the heart quiz. So that's a link right to the heart quiz. And then all you have to do is when you get there, you'll have to enter your username and password for Moodle, and then you can do the heart quiz. So remember, that's open today, it's open tomorrow, and it closes at 8:30 on Wednesday. So you want to make sure you're getting that done. Okay. I have our online classroom. So if I click on that, there we have the link to the Zoom location. Okay. So all of that information is here, and you can use your calendar, and you can create a calendar for each one of your courses, or you can ask your teacher to do that for those courses as well, so you have everything in one spot. Okay. All right. So are there any questions about the calendar? All right. So I shared that with you just to give you an opportunity to remember and learn and be a little bit more organized about when things are. Okay. One thing I do want to show you, if I take a look at the week part of the calendar, actually, I'm just going to forward to Thursday. Like a lot of you, haven't handed in your first aid booklets. Okay, the first aid booklets, I'm not accepting them after Thursday. Okay, I've been harping on this forever. I'm sick of harping on it. So that's it. Last chance to submit those is Thursday. Okay, so you've had a lot of opportunity. They're originally due on March 17th. So we're almost looking at like 3 weeks after the fact. So those need to be into me. As well, if I just go ahead one more day, there are still, so this is the first aid exam, I still have about 7 of you that haven't written that first aid exam yet. You're going to have to do that. So your last chance to do that is Friday, and then I'm closing that test. Okay, so I'm going to need you guys to get that done. For those of you that have yet to do that, and you know who you are, I've put missing on PowerSchool. Okay, so any questions about upcoming dates? All right. So I'm not going to give you guys any homework tonight because those of you who need to do the first aid stuff, you got to get that done. And you have a heart test. Okay, so you have the heart quiz that you guys are going to be writing for me. So today we're going to finish off blood vessels. On Wednesday, we're going to start talking about the blood, so specific parts of the blood. And then you'll have a worksheet that'll be due the following Tuesday because Monday's a holiday. Okay? So let's go through blood vessels because we're going to finish off this. So we won't use our full class time to get this done today. So I'm just going to share that with you. All right. And I'm just going to open up my drawings here. All right. Why is this not wanting to do what I want it to? There we go. Okay. So again, don't forget you need to know these prefixes. So this booklet will not be part of your quiz. Your quiz is just on the 2 heart booklets that we had. Okay, so you're aware of that. Remember we talked about arteries, veins, and capillaries. So arteries, right, they're thicker, they're more elastic. Veins, thinner, less elastic because less pressure or lower pressure blood goes through them, and they have one-way valves. And then capillaries, really, really thin, right? So the single cell, we can see that, and then we can see the little nucleus in those single cells, okay? All right, and this was just another view that we looked at last class when we were looking at capillaries and arteries. Okay, arteries, thicker walled and elastic, so they're getting high pressure blood coming from the heart. So I'm just going over a little bit of what we did last time. Okay. Just want to quickly see who we have here today. Okay. All right. Because it's high pressure blood, right? Don't forget arteries are carrying blood away from the heart, and arteries branch into smaller versions of arteries called arterioles. Aorta is the largest artery. You guys know that already. So it carries oxygenated blood to body tissue. And then pulmonary arteries carry deoxygenated blood to the lungs. All right, arterioles, small branches of arteries. Carry blood to the capillaries, and they're thinner than arteries. They don't have quite as much pressure. So an artery is directly coming from the heart, and then the branches off are going to be less directly from the heart, so less pressure in them. And then arterioles. So we talked about arterioles last class as well, and we talked about how they can control the flow of blood. Okay, so by dilating, so vasodilation, they get wider, and by constricting, so vasoconstriction, they get narrower. Okay. Now, why is this important? An example of this is our fight or flight response. So let's say that you're driving with your parents or you're driving. Most of you have your learners, right? So you're driving and you almost hit a person going through a crosswalk. You slam on the brakes, you barely miss them. But what's happening is we're going through that process as our heart's beating faster and our breathing rate is going up, right? All of this is happening. And what's going on with our blood vessels is our arterioles, our skin starts to pale because our arterioles constrict. So the blood flow to our skin gets constricted because we don't need our skin in order to deal with this experience, this high stress experience. So this is part of our fight or flight response. But where we have the vasodilation is going to our brain so we can think about what we need to do, and to our heart so it can beat properly and get blood flow going, and to our muscles in case we have to run. So that's our fight or flight response. So arterioles play a really big role in that. And again, like we said before, they're under autonomic or involuntary control. So we can't just decide to constrict our blood vessels. Okay. Our veins, okay, lower blood pressure, so they require in our veins valves, and they carry blood back to our heart. Okay. And we know our largest vein is our vena cava, carrying deoxygenated blood to the heart, and then our pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood back to the heart. All right. We talked about veins, and we talked about how it's really important for muscle contraction to happen, because really what happens is our muscle contracts, it pushes the blood through the vein to the next valve, and then it contracts again, pushing the blood to the next valve, and then slowly that blood moves its way back to the heart. Okay. All right. And then venules are merging to make veins. Okay, so now we're at capillaries. So capillaries is where we left off. So what's the most important thing about capillaries? With capillaries, this is the site of material exchange. Okay, our other blood vessels, they're too thick to allow stuff to go in and out, but our capillaries are 1 cell thick. So imagine these cells, but they're not like sewn together. There's like little gaps. So you can see like the little gaps between my fingers, and that allows materials to go in and out. Okay. So a couple other things we need to think about. If I look at this little cartoon image on the side, our red blood cells, you notice that they're all going in single file. Well, capillaries only are big enough to allow for those red blood cells. So that's what we're looking at here is red blood cells. And they have to travel through single file. They can't really go past one another because the diameter is so small. Okay. If we look at this image here, we see really teeny tiny capillaries, and we see the red blood cells traveling through them. Okay. All right. So material exchange happens between the blood and the body cells. All right. So I just want to ask you guys a question here. What are the body cells collecting from the blood? Okay. So the capillaries are transferring something to our body cells. What are they giving our body cells? So you just put that in the chat. Don't all answer at once. Okay, there's blood in our capillaries. Thank you. So our capillaries are transferring oxygen to our body cells, and they need oxygen as part of our cellular respiration process, right? Other things that are going to our cells, the nutrients that are in our blood that our cells need to do different functions, and the sugar, the glucose that's in our blood. Okay. All right. Also, we have this exchange that's happening between our blood and the air in our lungs. So, what is going from the blood to the lungs? What's transferring from the blood to the lungs with that exchange? Okay, take a minute, type something into chat. What's going from the blood to the lungs? Well, the blood does become deoxygenated, or the blood actually becomes oxygenated at the lungs. Yes, it's carbon dioxide, right? So our cells give off carbon dioxide as a waste, and then our blood carries that deoxygenated blood carries that, and that gets to our lungs, and then it goes into our lungs, these little tiny balls called alveoli, and then we can exhale that carbon dioxide. Okay? All right. The walls are 1 cell thick in our capillaries, right? That's what allows for that material exchange. Our other blood vessels, they're way too thick. There's too many layers of cells for stuff to diffuse through. And the diameter only allows the single file red blood cells to travel through, okay? And the other thing we want to remember is that the capillaries join the arterioles and the venules. So remember, we have arteries. Arteries branch into all these different arterioles. Arterioles branch into these little teeny tiny capillaries. Material exchange happens. The capillaries merge to form venules, and the venules merge to form veins. And then from the veins, that blood circulates back to our heart. Okay. So if we take a look at this image here, what we see is we have our arterioles. Okay. So our arteriole here, this branched off of an artery. Okay. So I'm just going to put my spotlight on here. So here's the arteriole. The arteriole was a branch off of an artery, and then the arterioles branching into all of these little capillaries. Material exchange is happening. Okay. So what's happening to the blood right now? What's happening to those capillaries? Can anyone give me like a few word statement? What's happening to these capillaries? Yeah, the oxygen is getting diffused into the cells. Exactly. So we're left with deoxygenated blood in the capillaries. So the oxygen is getting diffused into the cells. Deoxygenated blood is going into the capillaries. Those capillaries start to merge together to make a venule. All the venules will merge together to make veins. And then eventually all those veins merge together to make the vena cava, which is going to make its way back to our heart. Okay? All right. So when I look at this image, is this image showing me an example of a pulmonary circuit or a systemic circuit? Okay, taking a look at this image. Is this an example of a pulmonary circuit or a systemic circuit? Okay, I see that it's a systemic circuit. That's right. So I'm looking at a systemic circuit. So if I wanted to draw a similar picture, but to illustrate a pulmonary circuit, what would be different about my arteriole here in a pulmonary circuit? How would my image be different in a pulmonary circuit? How would that arteriole be different if I was drawing a pulmonary circuit? Any ideas? Okay, so with a pulmonary circuit, the blood would be getting oxygenated, which means that if this was a pulmonary circuit, this would be blue. My arterial capillaries, so all of these capillaries would be blue, and then they would start to turn red as they're collecting oxygen, and the venules would be red. Okay, all right. So let's go on to the next slide here. Okay, so what we're looking at here is just some description. So let's start with the artery. What is a word or two that I could use to describe an artery? So if I was going to look at an artery, a vein, and a capillary, what would be something that would help me identify that this is in fact an artery I'm looking at? Okay, what's a word or two that I could use to describe an artery? Okay, artery carries blood away from the heart. That'd be more a function, right? What would be a description? Like I'm looking at an artery, what am I seeing? Okay, good. So arteries are going to be thick-walled and they're going to be elastic. Okay. when we think about the function of an artery, moving high pressure blood away from the heart. So when I think about the key things I need to know, I've got to remember that arteries have high pressure blood in them because that's that pumping action of the heart, and it's moving blood away from the heart. Okay, so we want to remember that. Okay, when I think about a vein, what can I use to describe a vein? Okay, anything? What can I use to describe a vein? Come on, guys, I got like 11 of you here. I guess that includes me. I've got 10 of you here. Okay, a vein, thin-walled. So a vein is thin-walled, low pressure blood in a vein, though not high pressure. So a vein has thin walls, okay? It's less elastic, and a vein has a specific feature in it that arteries don't have. Okay, so it's thin-walled, it's less elastic, and what special feature is within a vein? Exactly, we have valves in our veins. We want to remember that, right? Valves are in our vein. So thinner walled, less elastic, and one-way valves. So when I think about what the job is, right, their function, low pressure blood back to the heart, okay? So we want to highlight that. It's low pressure blood and it goes back to the heart, all right? Okay, how could we describe a capillary? What could be something we could describe? I'm looking at a capillary, how can I describe it? Okay, so capillaries, that wall of a capillary is 1 cell thick. So that's really important for us to remember, okay? So 1 cell thick. And what important event happens at the capillaries? Okay, why do we need them? What are they doing for us? Okay, so blood is oxygenated and deoxygenated, depends on where they are. The big thing we want to remember is that's where material exchange is happening, right, at the capillaries, because it's not just oxygen, right? Nutrients and waste and everything are moving, but that's all happening through the capillaries. Okay, so let's go here. So diffusion of materials in and out of body cells and in and out of the lungs. Okay, all right, any questions about that? So those are the 3 blood vessels that you're responsible for knowing. So make sure you understand. You do have to know venules and arterioles, but these are the highlights as these 3. Okay, so let's move on. And there. Just going to get rid of my drawings here. All right. So the last thing we have to know is there's certain arteries that we have to just know the names of. So in this curricular outcome, we need to know the names of some primary arteries and then some less, some more minor arteries. So major arteries, minor arteries, and then major veins and minor veins. Okay. So the arterial system is all about the arteries. So those are all of the arteries that are in our body. In the systemic system, arteries carry oxygenated blood. In the pulmonary circuit, systemic circuit, arteries carry oxygenated blood. In the pulmonary circuit, arteries carry deoxygenated blood. You know this already, but you have to keep remembering this, okay? All right, so 2 of the primary arteries that you must know, the aorta and the pulmonary arteries. The biggest artery we already know is the aorta, okay? So receives oxygenated blood from the left ventricle. The pulmonary arteries receive deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle. Now, we want to remember that these are both high pressure, right? So the aorta and the pulmonary arteries both have high pressure blood. But the aorta has higher pressure blood than the pulmonary arteries because the left ventricle, I need to draw here, this has more muscle. And because it has more muscle, it's going to pump that blood harder. So it's going to be higher pressure when it gets into the aorta. Okay. And that's important because that blood has to make its way to every cell in our body. Whereas when we think about the pulmonary arteries, they're receiving blood from the right ventricle, and the right ventricle has less muscle. Okay. So there's less muscle in the right ventricle, so it's not going to pump that as much, which means our pulmonary arteries will have less pressure. Okay. All right. Any questions about that? Okay, so those are two of the arteries that you guys must know. Okay, aorta and pulmonary, but we have a couple other ones that I'm going to ask you guys to memorize as well. So next we have, so what we're looking at in these diagrams, on the left side of the image, we see just some general arteries inside the body. And then on the right side, we see the upper part of the body. Okay, so there are 6 arteries that I'm going to get you guys to memorize. Now, the first one you already know. All right, so the first one is the aorta. So what we see with the aorta, we see it leaving the heart to go up, right? So that would be the ascending aorta, and it's going to go up and branch into the upper part of the body. And then we see the aorta coming down. That's the descending aorta. Okay. So all of this is aorta, and then we see other arteries branching off of that, but you need to know the aorta. Okay. And you already do. So that's good. All right. The next one. The next one we have is the carotid artery. So the carotid artery is going along either side of your neck. So when you take a pulse in the neck, and you're trying to take the pulse, you're feeling that beat in your carotid artery, because we have to remember what a pulse is, right? The heart pumps. So we have this sort of bulge of blood that's going to go through the vessels, or go through the arteries. So as it's going through the arteries, we have this bulge, and then the heart relaxes, and then another bulge, and the heart's relaxing. So that bulge is our pulse. So we feel that in the carotid artery. So that would be pretty high pressure blood because it's a branch right off of the aorta. Okay. The next one is the brachial artery. So that's up here. Okay. So right where our bicep is. So the brachial artery is the one that we constrict with a blood pressure cuff. So when we're trying to detect what the blood pressure is, we're constricting that and then slowly allowing the blood to go through, and we hear some sounds. And we'll talk about how that's done a little bit later. Okay, that's the brachial artery. And then if we go to the next one, that's the radial artery. And the radial artery, if you kind of look at your hand, the radial artery is coming along this side, closer to where your thumb is. So when we're feeling our pulse and using the hand to feel pulse, we're looking at or feeling the radial artery to try to feel that pulse. Okay. All right, so those are 4 of the arteries. So we'll look at the 2 in the bottom part of the body. Okay. So this bottom one here is called the femoral artery. So that's the artery that's leading to our legs. So that's going to provide the oxygen and nutrients to our cells in the lower part of our body. And the femoral artery, it's an artery, right? Obviously. So if we had anything that was sort of nicking this or broke it, we would bleed out on the inside of our body pretty quickly. So if you suffer an injury of the femur, which is the big thigh bone here, biggest bone in our body, and it splinters to break the femoral artery, that would be really bad. So when we do first aid on people that we suspect a break in the femoral artery, we have to be really, really careful about that. Okay. And then lastly, we have the iliac artery. And the iliac artery is providing blood and nutrients to the pelvic region of our body. Okay. All right. So we'll just look at a couple notes on the arteries. So we have the carotid artery supplying blood to the head and neck, the brachial artery to the arm, the radial artery. So that's a branch of the brachial artery. So it's just carrying that blood further from the brachial artery now down towards the hand. The iliac artery. So that's a branch off of the descending aorta, and that's now going to feed those cells in the pelvic region. And then the femoral artery supplies blood to the thigh. That's going to branch to arteries in the lower part of the body, and it's a branch off of the iliac artery. Okay. All right. Any questions on arteries, the arterial system? Okay. Then we're going to look at the venous system. So this is the system of veins. Oops. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Let's move this here. There we are. Okay, so this is the system of veins in our body. And two of them we already have been working with quite a bit, two of the ones you need to know. Okay, so in the systemic circuit, veins carry deoxygenated blood. In the pulmonary circuit, the veins carry oxygenated blood. Okay, so our two veins, the vena cavae, which is a plural form of vena cava, those are the largest veins. Okay, they return deoxygenated blood to the right atrium. So the superior vena cava is carrying deoxygenated blood from the upper part of the body. So this blood that has now collected, it's dropped off its oxygen, it's collected waste products like carbon dioxide, that's being collected by the superior vena cava to go back to the right atrium of the heart. The inferior vena cava is going to collect blood from the lower part of the body, right? So our legs, our pelvic area, all those areas that have dropped off oxygen and collected waste and collected carbon dioxide, that's getting carried up through the inferior vena cava to the right atrium. The pulmonary veins, remember, those are part of the pulmonary circuit, and they are returning oxygenated blood to the left atrium. So those are the two major veins that you need to know. Okay, so now with this image, what we're looking at is a blend. We're looking at the veins and the arteries. So you guys need to know basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 veins. Okay. So the superior vena cava, so we see that, and the inferior vena cava. So I'm counting that as one of your 5. So the superior vena cava, so see all these veins coming back, that's going all back to the heart, right? So there's the superior and there's the inferior. So all of these veins are all merging into the inferior vena cava, going back to the right atrium of the heart. So those ones pretty easy to remember because we've talked about them quite a bit. So now we have the next one, which is, just move these guys, is the jugular vein. So the jugular vein runs alongside of the carotid artery, okay? So the carotid artery and the jugular vein are kind of beside one another. So this is a big vein. So all of the blood that's lost its oxygen from our upper like head region and our neck is going to dump right into the jugular vein, okay? The next vein we have here is called the subclavian vein. So all of the blood from our arms that's been deoxygenated is going to dump into the subclavian vein. And then we see how the jugular vein dumps into the subclavian. And then we see how the subclavian all joins up here with the superior vena cava, right? So that's that upper part of our body. Then when we take a look at the lower part of the body, okay, we have, let's get my mouse here, the iliac vein. So that's the vein where the blood's going to go back into after all of the organs in our pelvic region have lost their oxygen or the cells have gained oxygen. The blood has lost its oxygen. And then our last one is the femoral vein. So that's where like all of the cells from the legs, the lower part of the legs, the blood from the lower part of the legs have lost their oxygen and gained waste products. Okay. All right. So if we take a look over here, we have the jugular vein. So we're looking specifically now at veins that empty into the superior vena cava. So the jugular vein found in the neck, so blood drains from the head and the neck. The subclavian vein drains blood from the upper extremities. So upper extremities is just a fancy way to say arms. And then veins that empty into the inferior vena cava. So they're going to go into the inferior, and then that's going to go back to the right atrium through the bottom part. So the iliac vein found in the lower body near the groin, and the femoral vein is draining the blood in the lower extremities. All right, that's it. That's blood vessels. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a lesson on Wednesday on the blood, and then I'll give you a worksheet that's on the blood and blood vessels both to do over the 4-day weekend that you guys have coming up. All right, any questions about this or anything else, you can ask it to me with the chat, or you can unmute your mic and ask that way. Okay, I don't hear any questions, so I will assume that we're all doing good. So we will call it a day for right now, and we will see all of you guys again on Wednesday at 12:45. Okay, feel free to email me if you have any questions. See you guys later.